The desert wind carried tales that made even the bravest men shiver. In the dusty saloons of Tombstone, they spoke in hushed voices about Ayanna, the Apache queen who ruled the Red Rock canyons with an iron fist. Her name meant eternal blossom in her native tongue, but the settlers knew her as death incarnate. Every trading post from Arizona to New Mexico bore witness to her legend. No white man who entered her territory ever returned to tell the tale. Ayanna had earned her fearsome reputation through blood and cunning. When she was barely 16, white soldiers had burned her village and slaughtered her family. She escaped into the wilderness carrying nothing but her father's war paint and a heart filled with volcanic rage. Over the years, she gathered other survivors, Apache warriors who had lost everything to the endless wave of settlers pushing westward. Under her leadership, they became phantoms of the desert, striking swift and vanishing like smoke. Her territory stretched across the most unforgiving landscape in the Southwest. Red sandstone cliffs rose like ancient fortresses, hiding caves and secret passages known only to her people. Springs of fresh water bubbled up in hidden alcoves, creating small oases that sustained her band. The Apache queen knew every rock, every shadow, every trail that wound through this maze of stone. To outsiders, it was a death trap. To her, it was home. The stories grew wilder with each telling. Some claimed she could disappear into solid rock. Others swore she commanded the desert spirits themselves. Cowboy spoke of finding abandoned wagon trains with no survivors. The horses still in their traces, but the people vanished without a trace. Traders told of hearing her war cry echoing off the canyon walls just before arrows began raining from the sky. The Mexican government had placed a bounty on her head that could buy a man a ranch, but no bounty hunter had ever returned to claim it. What made Ayanna truly formidable was not just her skill in battle, but her intelligence. She spoke Spanish, English, and 3 Apache dialects fluently. She understood the minds of her enemies better than they understood themselves. When supply trains changed their routes, she anticipated their new paths. When cavalry patrols tried to track her, she led them into box canyons where the sun and thirst became her allies. She was not just a warrior. She was a strategist who turned the desert itself into her weapon. Her shelter lay deep in the heart of the Red Rock country, accessible only through a maze of narrow passages that seemed to shift and change in the dancing light. Ancient petroglyphs covered the walls, telling stories of her ancestors who had walked these lands for countless generations. Here, surrounded by her most trusted warriors, she planned raids and tended to the old Apache ways. The shelter was more than a hideout. It was a sanctuary where the old traditions lived on despite the changing world outside. Jake Morrison knew all these stories, but desperation has a way of making men foolish. His younger brother Tommy had been part of a surveying crew that vanished near the Red Rock country 3 weeks ago. While other families mourned and moved on, Jake couldn't let go. Tommy was all the family he had left after their parents died of fever in Kansas. The boy was only 19, full of dreams about mapping the territories and maybe finding gold. Jake had tried to talk him out of joining the survey team, but Tommy was stubborn. A family trait that now might have gotten him killed. The search parties had given up after finding the surveying equipment scattered across a dry creek bed. No bodies, no blood, just theodolites and measuring chains abandoned in the sand. The territorial governor declared the men dead and closed the matter. But Jake couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think of anything except the possibility that Tommy might still be alive somewhere in that Red Rock maze. Every night he stared at the stars and wondered if his brother was doing the same. Standing outside the Last Chance Saloon in Tucson, Jake made a decision that everyone said was suicide. He would ride into Apache Queen territory alone, not to fight, not to capture her, but to ask for his brother back. It was madness, but it was the only madness that made sense to him. As he checked his rifle and counted his water bottles, Jake Morrison had no idea that his desperate mission would challenge everything the Apache Queen believed about the white man's heart. The morning sun was already burning hot when Jake mounted his horse and rode toward the Red Rocks. Behind him, the townspeople shook their heads and began composing his obituary. Ahead lay a landscape that had swallowed dozens of men whole, but Jake Morrison was riding toward something more dangerous than the desert or even the Apache. Queen's legendary wrath, he was riding toward the moment when 2 wounded hearts would meet in the most unlikely of places. Jake Morrison's horse picked its way carefully through the maze of red sandstone as the sun climbed higher in the desert sky. The cowboy had been riding for 3 days now, following game trails and dry creek beds deeper into territory that maps marked as unexplored. His water was running low and his horse was showing signs of exhaustion, but Jake pressed on. Every canyon looked the same, towering walls of crimson stone that seemed to glow with their own inner fire. On the third afternoon, Jake's luck ran out. His horse stepped wrong on a loose rock and went down hard, its right front leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Jake knelt beside the animal, his heart sinking as he realized the injury was too severe. With tears in his eyes, he did what any cowboy would do for a suffering horse. The gunshot echoed off the canyon walls like thunder, and suddenly Jake found himself alone in the vast red wilderness with nothing but the supplies he could carry. The silence after the gunshot seemed to press in on him from all sides. Jake shouldered his pack and rifle, taking one last look at his faithful horse before starting to walk. The sun was merciless, and he knew he was probably going to die out here. But the thought of Tommy kept him moving forward, one step at a time through the burning sand. He had been walking for maybe 2 hours when the arrows started. They didn't come all at once, just single shots that buried themselves in the sand near his feet or sparked off the rocks beside him. Jake understood the message. Someone was hurting him, driving him like cattle toward a destination they chose. He could have tried to run or find cover, but exhaustion and grief had burned the fight out of him. Instead, he raised his hands above his head and kept walking in the direction the arrows seemed to want him to go. The canyon gradually narrowed until the walls rose so high above him that Jake could only see a thin ribbon of blue sky. His boots echoed in the confined space, and he began to notice things that made his skin crawl. Bleached bones scattered in the sand, some animal but others that looked disturbingly human. Broken pieces of wagon wheels and rusted metal that might have been weapons or tools. This was clearly a killing ground, a place where the Apache Queen's enemies came to die. As Jake rounded a bend in the canyon, he saw them. A dozen Apache warriors emerged from cracks in the rock walls that he would have sworn were solid stone. They moved like shadows made flesh, their faces painted for war, weapons ready. But what stopped Jake's heart was the figure who stepped out last. Even without the stories, he would have known her instantly. Ayanna stood nearly 6 feet tall, her long black hair braided with eagle feathers and silver ornaments that caught the desert light. Her buckskin dress was decorated with intricate beadwork that told the story of her victories. But it was her eyes that held Jake frozen, dark as midnight, ancient as the canyon walls, and filled with a hatred so pure it seemed to burn the air between them. This was a woman who had looked into the face of death so many times that she had become death herself. The warriors formed a circle around Jake, but none of them spoke. They seemed to be waiting for something, and Jake realized they were waiting for their queen to decide his fate. He had imagined this moment during his long ride, but now that it was here, his carefully planned words dried up in his throat. How do you ask mercy from someone whose entire life has been shaped by the absence of mercy? Ayanna walked slowly around him, studying him like a predator examining prey. She was close enough that Jake could smell the sage and cedar smoke that clung to her clothes, could see the small scars on her hands that spoke of countless battles. When she finally spoke, her English was perfect, touched with just a trace of accent that made it sound like music. "So," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the confined space of the canyon, "another white man comes to die in my territory. But this one walks alone, and when my warriors gave him the chance to run, he chose to follow their arrows instead. Tell me, cowboy, are you brave or simply tired of living?" Jake found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Neither, ma'am. I'm just a brother looking for his brother." The Apache Queen stopped directly in front of him, and Jake could see something flicker in her dark eyes. Surprise, maybe, or curiosity. It was the first crack he'd seen in her mask of deadly calm. "A brother," she repeated, and there was something in her voice that Jake couldn't identify. "You ride alone into my domain knowing you will die for a brother?" "Tommy Morrison," Jake said, the words tumbling out now. 19 years old, part of a surveying crew that disappeared 3 weeks ago. Brown hair, green eyes, about my height but skinnier. He's got a scar on his left hand from when we were kids, and he grabbed a hot poker by mistake. He's all the family I got left in this world." Ayanna studied his face for a long moment, and Jake thought he saw something shift in her expression. The warriors around them remained perfectly still, waiting for her command. One word from her and Jake would join the bones scattered in the sand. But instead of giving that word, she did something that surprised everyone, including herself. "Follow me," she said, turning toward a narrow crack in the canyon wall that Jake would never have noticed on his own. "We will talk more in my shelter." The crack in the canyon wall was so narrow that Jake had to turn sideways to squeeze through. The Apache warriors followed in single file, moving with the fluid grace of people who had made this journey countless times. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes opening into small chambers lit by shafts of sunlight from above, sometimes narrowing to barely shoulder width. Jake began to understand how the Apache queen had remained uncaptured for so long. Her territory was a maze that only she and her people knew how to navigate. After what felt like an hour of walking through the stone labyrinth, they emerged into a hidden valley that took Jake's breath away. Towering red cliffs surrounded a natural amphitheater maybe half a mile across. Springs bubbled up from the rock floor, creating pools of crystal-clear water surrounded by green grass and wildflowers. Ancient cottonwood trees provided shade, their leaves whispering in the desert breeze. It was like finding paradise hidden in the heart of hell. But what really captured Jake's attention were the people. This wasn't just a war party, it was a community. Apache families moved about their daily business, children playing in the grass while their mothers worked at grinding corn or weaving baskets. Old men sat in the shade, telling stories or crafting weapons with practiced hands. The legendary Apache queen wasn't just a warrior, she was the leader of a people trying to survive in a world that wanted them erased. Ayana's shelter sat against the far cliff face, built into a natural cave that had been expanded and improved over generations. The entrance was decorated with painted symbols that Jake recognized as protective wards, though he didn't understand their specific meanings. Animal hide coverings could be rolled down to close off the entrance during storms or attacks. It was both home and fortress, a place where the old ways lived on despite the changing world outside. Inside, the shelter was larger than Jake had expected, with several chambers carved into the living rock. The main room was furnished with buffalo robes and woven mats, weapons hanging from pegs driven into the stone walls. A small fire pit in the center provided warmth and light, the smoke escaping through natural vents in the ceiling. But what drew Jake's attention immediately were the objects that didn't belong: surveying equipment, pocket watches, rings, and other items that could only have come from the missing men. Ayana noticed his stare and gestured toward a pile of goods in one corner. "The possessions of those who entered my territory uninvited," she said simply. "Your people take our land, our water, our buffalo. We take what they carry." "And the men who carried them?" Jake asked, though he was afraid of the answer. The Apache queen studied his face carefully before responding. "Some died fighting. Some died from thirst or heat when they became lost in the canyons. And some—" She paused, seeming to weigh her words. "Some we kept alive." Jake's heart leaped. "Tommy, is he alive?" "Perhaps. But first you will tell me why I should not kill you where you stand. You are white. Your people have brought nothing but death to mine. Why should one cowboy's love for his brother mean anything to me?" Jake had thought about this question during his long ride, but now that the moment was here, he found himself speaking from the heart rather than from any prepared speech. "Because I know what it's like to lose family. My parents died of fever when Tommy was just 12. I've been looking after him ever since, trying to keep him safe and fed and give him a chance at something better than what we had. He's not just my brother, he's my son, my responsibility, my reason for getting up in the morning. When you lose everyone else, the ones who are left become more precious than gold." Something shifted in Ayana's expression as he spoke. The mask of cold hatred wavered, revealing glimpses of a pain that mirrored his own. "You speak of loss as if you invented it, white man. But I have lost more than you can imagine. My mother, my father, my sisters, my first husband, all dead because your people wanted our land." "I'm not here to argue about who suffered more," Jake said quietly. "I'm here because a 19-year-old kid made a mistake and I can't let him die for it. If you want to kill me, I understand. But if Tommy's alive, please let him go. He never hurt anyone in his life." Ayana was quiet for a long time, staring into the small fire that burned between them. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, though no less guarded. "You are not what I expected, Jake Morrison. The white men who come here usually arrive with guns blazing, shouting about manifest destiny and the superiority of their race. You came alone, unarmed, asking rather than demanding. Sometimes asking is all a man has left. The Apache queen rose and walked to the back of the shelter, disappearing into one of the smaller chambers. Jake could hear her moving around, and then she returned carrying something that made his breath catch. Tommy's survey notebook, the leather cover stained with sand and sweat but unmistakably his brother's. "Your brother is alive," Ayanna said, setting the notebook down between them. "Barely. He and 2 others from his survey team have been my prisoners for 18 days. They were mapping our water sources, probably to help more settlers find their way into our territory." "Where is he?" "Can I see him?" "You can see him. But first you must understand the situation. My warriors want them dead. They see every white man as an enemy to be eliminated before he can bring others. I have kept your brother and his companions alive against the wishes of my own people." "Do you know why?" Jake shook his head, afraid to guess. "Because one of them, a young man with green eyes and a scar on his hand, reminded me of someone I lost long ago." Ayanna's voice grew distant, heavy with memory. "My younger brother, Nalnish. He was Tommy's age when the soldiers came to our village. He died trying to protect our mother, throwing rocks at men with rifles because he had no other weapon." The shelter fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. Jake began to understand that he had stumbled into something more complex than a simple exchange of prisoners. The Apache queen had kept Tommy alive not out of mercy, but because his brother's face had awakened ghosts she thought were buried. "If I let them go," Ayanna continued, "my warriors may decide I have grown weak. If I kill them, I become what the white man's stories say I am, a monster who shows no mercy to the innocent. You have put me in an impossible position, Jake Morrison." "Then let me take that burden from you," Jake said. "Let me and Tommy and his companions go, and I give you my word. We'll never speak of this place or how to find it. Your secret dies with us." Ayanna laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The word of a white man. Do you know how many treaties your people have broken? How many promises turned to lies when it suited them? I'm not my people. I'm just one man trying to save his brother." The Apache queen stared at him for a long moment, then stood and walked toward the shelter entrance. "Come, you want to see your brother? Then see him. But know this, what you find may not be the boy you remember." Ayanna led Jake across the hidden valley to a smaller cave on the opposite side of the cliff face. 2 Apache warriors stood guard at the entrance, their faces grim and unwelcoming. They nodded respectfully to their queen but watched Jake with barely concealed hostility. These men had lost friends and family to white violence, and they clearly didn't approve of their leader's decision to keep prisoners alive. The cave was dark and damp, lit only by a small fire near the entrance. As Jake's eyes adjusted to the gloom, he saw 3 figures huddled against the far wall. They were alive, but barely recognizable as the healthy young surveyors they had once been. 18 days of captivity, limited food, and the constant fear of death had taken their toll. Their clothes were torn and filthy, their faces gaunt with hunger and exhaustion. But when one of the prisoners looked up and saw Jake, his green eyes widened with disbelief. Jake, is that really you?" "Hello, little brother." Jake's voice cracked with emotion as he took in Tommy's condition. The boy was thin as a rail, his brown hair matted with dirt and sweat. The scar on his left hand that Jake had mentioned stood out pale against his sun-darkened skin. But he was alive, and that was enough to make Jake want to weep with relief. Tommy tried to stand but stumbled, his legs too weak to support him properly. Jake caught him in a fierce embrace, feeling how much weight his brother had lost. "I thought I'd never see you again," Tommy whispered. "When they captured us, I thought we were all dead men." "Not yet. You're not." Jake looked at the other 2 prisoners, a middle-aged surveyor named Peterson and a young man about Tommy's age called Billy. Both looked ready to collapse, but their eyes held a spark of hope at seeing another white man in this forsaken place. "How did you find us?" Peterson asked weakly. "Nobody knows where we are. Hell, we don't even know where we are." "I made a deal with the Apache queen," Jake said, though he realized he hadn't actually made any deal yet. "Just asked for one. I'm here to take you home." Ayanna had been standing silently in the cave entrance, but now she stepped forward. "You speak too freely of deals that do not exist, Cowboy. I have made no promises about letting anyone go." The 3 prisoners shrank back against the cave wall at the sound of her voice. Clearly they knew exactly who she was and what she was capable of. Tommy grabbed Jake's arm with shaking fingers. "Jake, you don't understand. She's killed dozens of people. We've seen the bones scattered around her territory. She's going to kill us all. Maybe, Jake said quietly, but not today. Ayanna gestured for Jake to follow her back outside, leaving the prisoners in the care of the guards. They walked in silence to a grove of cottonwood trees near one of the springs, where the sound of running water provided some privacy for their conversation. "Your brother fears me," Ayanna observed. "Good. Fear keeps prisoners alive longer than false hope. He's just a kid who made a mistake." "They all are. A mistake. They were mapping our water sources, Jake Morrison. Water is life in the desert. With their maps, 1,000 settlers could find their way into our territory. Could take the springs that keep my people alive. Is that a mistake or an act of war?" Jake had no good answer to that question. Tommy and his crew had been doing exactly what she said, creating maps that would make Apache lands accessible to white settlement. From Ayanna's perspective, they were scouts for an invading army. "What would it take?" Jake asked. "What would it take for you to let them go?" Ayanna was quiet for a long time, staring at the water flowing from the spring. When she spoke, her words surprised him. "Tell me about your brother. Not the surveyor, not the white man, the person. What kind of man is Tommy Morrison?" Jake thought about how to answer. "He's got the biggest heart of anyone I know. When we were kids, he used to bring home every stray dog and hurt bird he found. He'd spend his last nickel buying food for someone hungrier than he was. He wanted to be a surveyor because he thought mapping the territories would help people find better lives, not because he wanted to hurt anyone. And yet his maps would bring more people like the ones who killed my family. Tommy doesn't think about it that way. He sees empty land and thinks about families who need homes, not about the people who might already be living there. It's not meanness, it's ignorance. Ignorance can be as deadly as hatred," Ayanna said. "Perhaps more so." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the water and the distant sounds of the Apache camp. Jake watched Ayanna's profile as she stared into the distance, and he began to see past the fearsome reputation to the woman beneath. She was beautiful. There was no denying that, but it was a hard beauty forged by years of struggle and loss. Every line of her face spoke of battles fought and prices paid. "You said Tommy reminded you of your brother," Jake said carefully. "Tell me about him." Ayanna's expression softened slightly. "Nalnish was 2 years younger than me. He had the same green eyes as your brother, the same way of looking at the world as if it were full of wonders waiting to be discovered. He wanted to be a medicine man, to learn the old healing ways from our grandfather. He spent hours collecting herbs and studying the movements of animals, believing that everything in nature had something to teach us." "What happened to him?" "The cavalry came at dawn. We had been living peacefully, following the old treaties, bothering no one. But someone had reported that we were hiding renegade warriors, which was a lie. The soldiers gave us no chance to explain, no opportunity to prove our innocence. They rode through our village shooting everything that moved." Ayanna's voice grew hard again. "Nalnish died trying to shield our mother with his own body. 14 years old, and he faced trained killers with nothing but courage." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "How long ago?" 7 years. 7 years of war, 7 years of making the white man pay for what he took from me." Ayanna looked at him directly. "And now you come here, asking me to show mercy to men who were preparing the way for more settlers, more soldiers, more death for my people. Do you see why my warriors think I should kill you all?" "I see it," Jake said. "But I also see something else. You've kept them alive for 18 days when you could have killed them immediately. You brought me here to see them instead of shooting me down in the canyon. You're looking for a reason not to kill us, aren't you?" Ayanna stood up abruptly, her face closing off again. "Do not presume to understand my thoughts, white man. I am still deciding whether you live or die." But as she walked away, Jake caught a glimpse of something in her dark eyes that gave him hope. The Apache Queen was indeed looking for a way out of this situation that didn't involve more death. The question was whether Jake could help her find it before time ran out for all of them. That evening, Ayanna summoned Jake to join her council of war. The Apache elders and warriors gathered in a circle around a large fire in the center of the valley. The flames cast dancing shadows on their painted faces as they debated the fate of the prisoners, in voices that rose and fell like desert wind. Jake couldn't understand most of what was being said, but he didn't need to speak Apache to recognize the anger and bloodlust in their voices. An old warrior named Cochise stood and spoke passionately, gesturing toward the cave where the prisoners were held. His scarred face was fierce in the firelight, and several younger warriors nodded in agreement with his words. Ayanna translated quietly for Jake. He says the white men should die slowly, as examples to others who would violate our territory. He reminds the council that mercy to enemies is a luxury we cannot afford. Another elder, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, spoke in gentler tones. She argues that killing prisoners who offered no resistance goes against the old ways, Ayanna explained. She says warriors should die fighting, not helpless in caves. The debate went on for hours. Jake listened to the ebb and flow of argument, understanding that his life and the lives of Tommy and the others hung on words he couldn't comprehend. Some speakers were clearly calling for blood, while others seemed more conflicted. Ayanna herself remained silent through most of the discussion, her face unreadable in the firelight. Finally, Cochise turned directly to Jake and spoke in broken English. "You, White Eyes, why should we not kill you? Your people kill our children, take our land, break every promise. Why should Apache show mercy when white man shows none?" Jake stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye upon him. He had one chance to say something that might save them all, and he had no idea what words might accomplish that miracle. So he spoke from his heart, hoping that truth might succeed where cleverness would fail. "Because I'm not asking you to show mercy to the white man," Jake said. "I'm asking you to show mercy to a brother. You've all lost people you loved. You know what that feels like. You know what it does to a man's heart when the people he's supposed to protect are taken from him. I can't bring back your families, and I can't undo the wrongs my people have done to yours. But I can tell you that if you let my brother die, you'll be creating the same pain in me that the soldiers created in you." The circle was silent for a long moment. Then the silver-haired woman spoke again, her voice soft but carrying clearly in the still air. Ayanna's translation came in whispers. She says you speak like a man who knows grief. She asks if you would be willing to take the place of the 3 prisoners. Jake's blood went cold, but he didn't hesitate. "Yes." Ayanna stared at him in shock. "You would die so that strangers might live? One of them is my brother. That makes it no choice at all." The Apache queen stood and spoke rapidly to the council in her own language. Jake caught the word for brother several times, and he saw several of the warriors exchanging glances. Whatever she was saying, it was having an effect. When Ayanna finished speaking, Cochise replied with obvious anger, but the silver-haired woman cut him off with sharp words of her own. Other voices joined the argument, some supporting each position. Jake realized that Ayanna had divided the council, creating a debate where none had existed before. Finally, the Apache queen raised her hand for silence. When she spoke, it was in English so that Jake could understand. "The council is divided. Some say we should kill all the white men as examples. Others say we should honor the courage of a man willing to die for his brother. There is wisdom in both positions." She paused, looking around the circle at each face illuminated by the fire. "But I am your war chief, and the final decision is mine. Here is what will happen. At sunrise, Jake Morrison will face a trial of truth. If he survives, all 4 white men go free. If he dies, his sacrifice will honor his brother's memory, but the other 3 will join him in death." Jake felt his mouth go dry. "What kind of trial?" "You will walk unarmed through the canyon of whispers where the spirits of our ancestors dwell. If the spirits judge your heart pure, you will emerge alive. If they find you wanting, the canyon will become your grave." Ayanna's dark eyes fixed on his. "It is not a test of courage or strength, white man. It is a test of truth. The spirits will look into your soul and judge what they find there." Cochise spat into the fire, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. He spoke angrily in Apache, and Ayanna translated. "He says the spirits will never accept a white man. He believes you go to certain death." "Maybe," Jake said, "but it's better than no chance at all." The council began to break up, warriors returning to their families and their evening routines. But as Jake prepared to leave, Ayanna caught his arm. "There is something you should know about the Canyon of Whispers," she said quietly. "It is not the spirits that judge men there. It is their own hearts. The canyon has a way of showing a person the truth about himself, whether he wants to see it or not. Many Apache warriors have entered seeking visions and emerged changed forever. And some don't emerge at all. Some do not. The canyon keeps those who cannot face what they truly are." Ayanna studied his face in the dying firelight. "Are you prepared to confront the darkest parts of yourself, Jake Morrison? Because that is what tomorrow will demand of you." Jake thought about Tommy, about the promise he had made to their dying parents to keep his little brother safe. He thought about all the ways he had failed at that promise. All the times he had been too harsh or too absent or too focused on his own troubles to give Tommy the guidance he needed. "I don't know if I'm prepared," Jake said honestly. "But I know I have to try." Ayanna nodded slowly. "That may be enough. Rest now. Tomorrow you walk with the spirits, and they will decide if you are the man you claim to be." As Jake made his way to the small shelter the Apache had provided for him, he wondered what the canyon would show him about himself. Part of him was terrified of what truths might be waiting in those ancient stone passages. But another part of him, the part that had ridden alone into Apache territory with nothing but hope and desperation, was almost curious to discover what the spirits would make of Jake Morrison's soul. Dawn came too quickly and not soon enough. Jake had spent the night staring at the stars through the smoke hole in his shelter, his mind racing through memories of his life with Tommy. Every mistake he had made as an older brother, every time he had been impatient or distant, every moment when he should have been kinder played through his thoughts like a painful symphony. By the time the eastern sky began to lighten, he felt raw and exhausted. Ayanna came for him as the sun touched the rim of the canyon. She was dressed in ceremonial buckskin, decorated with beadwork that seemed to capture and reflect the early morning light. Her long black hair was braided with eagle feathers and silver ornaments that chimed softly as she walked. But it was her face that caught Jake's attention. Gone was the mask of cold hatred he had grown accustomed to, replaced by something that looked almost like concern. "It is time," she said simply. The entire Apache band had gathered to witness his trial. Men, women, and children lined the path leading to the canyon entrance, their faces solemn in the growing light. Jake realized that this was more than entertainment for them. It was a sacred ritual, a communion with the spirits of their ancestors. His success or failure would be seen as a judgment not just on him, but on all white men. Tommy and the other prisoners had been brought from their cave to watch. His brother's green eyes were wide with terror and confusion. "Jake, what's happening?" "What are you doing?" "Something I should have done a long time ago," Jake replied, though he wasn't.